The roars and growls of the Gorum still echoed through the metallic halls of the hidden sales base. They were still all shaking long after the heavy metal plate slid into place, ensuring that it would be hours before even these creatures could cut their way up and into the main chambers. Miria, Rayya, and Olan observed the carnage that was strewn about in front of them. A dead orc, a couple of kobolds, and a dead lizard man lay sprawled about, their armor cracked and battered, their bodies pulverized, and their weapons notably missing.
It's a shame that Mormont got out of here before the Gorum got to him.
Is Rayya free of his spell? Do we have to worry about him showing up and barking orders?
I'm afraid we do. Thankfully, you can only be mind-controlled by one person at a time. As long as we can avoid Mormont for a day, I can cast the same spell on you, then break it so that you'll have your free will fully back. The dumb thing is I don't feel like I am missing my free will. It's an insidious spell. As I said, I'm kind of ashamed I know it.
Can we use the gear on these creatures?
Maybe. This stuff is much lighter than the metal armor I've seen on this planet. We might be able to take some pieces off of it and attach it to a leather jerkin and give some pretty good armor. Let's see if we can't strip this orc.
Miria paused, and then a wicked smile spread across her lips.
Wait. Speaking of things they have that we want, they must have come down here in a spaceship. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go be pirates.
Welcome back to Swords Against Madness, an experimental fusion of storytelling and solo fantasy role-playing games. I'm playing Swords and Wizardry, a modern remake of the original 1974 rules for Dungeons & Dragons, along with a few solo RPG tools. I play the game and then I turn it into a gonzo, psychedelic swords and sorcery story for your entertainment. And along the way, I try to keep it what passed for PG in the 1980s. If you didn't see it in Goonies, Gremlins, or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you won't hear it here. So strap on your studded leather kirtle, get comfy in that chainmail bikini, reload your three-bladed sword, and fire up the wizard van. It's time to get weird. Miria tightened the belt of her silken robe. It had been battered, cut, stained, and burned in the last few days, and was almost barely worth wearing, she realized as she pulled it tight. But it was better than Olan's scarf. She considered flirtatiously handing it back to him after it had been tied around her for so long. But she decided she would wait to get a better sense of him before she did anything too daring. She didn't know the customs of this land, let alone the planet, very well. She was frankly amazed that she hadn't been burnt at the stake, covered in slime, or chased out of town and beaten with rubber hoses yet. Like any spacefarer, she had her share of misadventures, thanks to miscommunications and cultural misunderstandings, let alone the misadventures she'd earned by being a scofflaw.
Darmok and Jalad on the ocean,
she reminded herself. An old and unlikely saying that reminded people to be careful about casually picking up aliens before you got to know them. Did you say something?
Nothing. Just wondering where I can find some clothes that fit me around here.
That's probably my fault. I was in charge of seeing to your care, and I didn't think for one moment about you needing new robes. Or maybe something that doesn't scream, I'm from outer space.
Unfortunately, that's a signal I send no matter where I go. I'll have to get you to help me pick something out.
Behind Miria's back, Rayya chucked Olan on the arm, and then made a couple of hand gestures, just to make sure that Olan didn't miss the fact that he was being flirted with. He'd certainly missed it a few times before. Never mind that. It's time to get serious. They stepped out into the cool, wet night air, smelling the distinct chemical smell of exhaust. The dropship sat only a few 100 feet away, a still glowing outsized hunk of metal that looked more than anything like a giant metallic flea squatting in the jungle. They crouched low, moving slowly through the foliage, trying to avoid the sweeping searchlights. Miria caught herself holding her breath as she crept towards the ramp at the back of the ship. Was there much crew left on board? Her nose didn't tell her anything. The smell of hot metal, of chemical propellants, and the wet mix of perfume and decay of the jungle prevented her from being able to detect any creature within. She shrugged her shoulders. She wished she had paid attention to her family's battle code a little clearer. She had no idea how to communicate this. Olan and Rayya seemed to get the hint, and crept through the foliage up to the edge of the ramp, before Olan headed in first, drawing a dagger and gripping a laser pistol in his other hand. Inside, the engines roared, drowning out any hope of detecting a sign of life until you were right on top of it. The main bay was dim lit, a handful of soft seats on either side, with crash harnesses and netting around them, racks for stowing gear above the heads. He advanced, signaling Miria and Rayya to stay a little behind him. One step after another, trying to keep his feet from making too much noise on the metal plating of the deck below him. There was a short stairwell and a hatch. He caught a flash of motion, and then noticed a long, scaly tail, in places covered by armor plating, emerging from the back of a contoured command chair. Looking up, he saw the broad shoulders, and then the scaly head of Sshosk. The reptilian was hissing and growling, working controls, trying to get a signal from anyone in his combat party. Was there anyone left? And would Yanghu allow him the honor of going and finishing the job himself, as his underlings had proven clearly incompetent? Olan reversed the dagger and held his breath. One step, then another, going higher and higher, closer to the creature. He spent time studying its neck, the sinews, the places where a small pulse could be seen. He was quite certain he had a good idea of where there was a vein, and he was going to have to go straight for it, whether he liked it or not. Closer, closer, he was almost on it now. He bit his lip, slowly raising the dagger. Olan had no idea how Sshosk detected him. Perhaps a reflection, perhaps a small clink on the metal, but suddenly the reptilian wheeled around, grabbing the pistol off of its console. Olan didn't miss a beat. He lunged forward, blade in hand, shouting a call to Rayya and Miria to join him. Then a thin beam of cutting light emerged from Shosk's weapon. Olan's shout was cut short, and he collapsed to the floor. His dagger made a soft sound as it glanced harmlessly off of the ceramic chausses that Sshosk wore around his shins. The wound was nothing more than a single tiny pinhole, a dark patch of burnt tissue, but it sat right between his eyes. Olan was dead. Miria and Rayya's screams echoed through the ship as Sshosk stood up and put his foot down hard on Olan's back. He aimed his pistol, preparing a security shot, just in case. Jerking with the surprise of other voices, he looked up and saw Miria and Rayya charging towards him. He saw Miria drawing a laser pistol and turned his own weapon on her, only to find that it wasn't yet ready to recharge. Sshosk prepared himself to die. Miria didn't hesitate to pull the trigger, but the gun was ancient and poorly maintained. There was a spark and a hiss as it melted down in her hand. The reptilian grinned a sharp-toothed grin. His own weapon was ready to fire again. He leveled it at Miria, pausing for effect, only to have Rayya suddenly erupt up from the stairs, grab hold of his arm, and twist him. The two of them spun in a tangle, crashing down the stairs. Rayya planted her knees on his chest and rode him down as she drove her saber through his chest, letting the impact when they hit the bulkhead drive her saber clean through his armor. She didn't bother retrieving her blade. She was up again in a flash and cradling Olan in her lap.
He's dead, Star Prophet's the all-knowing. He's dead.
Miria cast her eyes around desperately. Even a laser bolt through the brain was reparable with the right technology. The medkit on the wall of the dropship was far more modern and far more advanced than the one Yanghu had left in his showroom. She pulled it down, pried it open, and immediately began touching holograms, trying to calibrate it for the correct species.
He's not dead yet, Rayya. The nanotechnology in this medkit is enough to heal almost anything, even damage like that. Come on, there it is, human. Okay, neural reconstruction.
She had seconds at best. She was already sprinting up the stairs with the medkit in hand when suddenly all the holograms turned blue, and then Yanghu's face appeared in the middle of them.
I'm impressed, Miria. Somehow you got to a dropship medkit. I'd expected better of my men, but I took a precaution anyway. You will find your filthy little species has been locked out of my medical systems. I mean it when I say I wish to enjoy watching you slowly fry from the inside. You'll have to try harder next time.
Miria screamed with fury and flung her medkit as hard as she could. It bounced off of the open hatchway and landed at the feet of a Gorum, who was standing just outside the hatch. The creature looked up in surprise, unexpecting this as its welcome. It stood dumbfounded, with the orc's shotgun in its hand for a moment. Just long enough for Miria to grab hold of Olan's dagger and throw it hard. It sunk into the creature's chest. It looked down at the blade sunken into its flesh and smiled a wide smile, growling. It took a few steps forward, aiming the shotgun. And then a burst of automatic laser fire cut the creature to ribbons as Rayya worked out her grief with the laser rifle Olan had slung over his back.
How'd that one get out? He must have got out the same way Kalmek got in. A hole in the ceiling. Then we've got to get out of here. There's no way in the 9 hells I'm giving up this ship. Not after Olan, not after everything we've been through. Cover the hatch.
Miria dove into one of the side gun pods, tucked underneath the wing of the ship. She used a joystick to turn the pod as she quickly worked the computer. The thermographic sighting system quickly picked up several warm bodies coming out of a vent of cold air. She unleashed a storm of plasma at the location, hammering it with every last bit of energy the ship's weapons could muster. By the time she was done firing, several Gorum had been evaporated. It would take them weeks to reconstitute themselves. In the meantime, she blasted away at the cliffside until several hundred tons of rubble fell down into the hole, stopping it up. The Gorum were awake, but they were buried.
Those Gorum aren't going anywhere. What do we do now? I tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna go back in there, and we're gonna haul out that pile of gold. Not because we want the gold, but because it's a clue to whoever's doing business with Yanghu down here. We're gonna wake up the all-knowing, we're gonna help me find a cure, and we're gonna burn every connection that keeps that scumbag coming back to this planet. And then we're gonna find a way to blast him out of the sky.
A few minutes later, Miria and Rayya were hauling the treasure aboard the ship. It had taken them several minutes, and they had spilled quite a bit of the gold along the way. But they had enough. Enough at least to figure out who was dealing with Yanghu. Enough to buy Olan a decent funeral. Maybe even enough to start something new up in space again when all this was said and done. Rayya cradled her dead cousin's body in her lap. She felt like she ought to cry, but somehow she was just too damn angry to do so. A few minutes later they were airborne, flying low and slow over the jungle, searing the tops off of the tallest trees, and heading back to Nar. Hi there, I hope you like what you're hearing. Today's sponsor is me, and my audio production company, Stormhead Productions. I want to help give you a voice, whether it's a video project, ads for the radio or internet, editing your podcast so you don't have to, or helping you plan everything from the very first ideas all the way down to your marketing strategy. Podcasts are my passion because I love helping other people express their passion. and I want to give you the tools to bring your ideas to the world. Check out my website, https://stormheadproductions.ca, and find out what I can do to help you get your voice out there. Or contact me on Twitter @StormheadAudio, and let me help you sound amazing. Well, that was a hell of a scene, wasn't it? I finally lost a player character, and it wasn't the one I was expected. Miria is still hanging around with 1 hit point and radiation poisoning after all this time. The chaos of the dice can be a really fickle mistress. In the first part of the session, Olan was on fire. He managed to slip his bonds, and then he successfully picked 2 locks in a row. With only a 25% chance of success, that's impressive. Throughout the last few encounters, I had Olan rolling hear noise to keep track of where the Gorum were, to keep the player characters from turning the wrong way or waiting too long, which was something I tried to embody in the narrative by talking about him hearing the Gorum, about letting you know where they are with sound cues. And then when they finally got out of the dungeon, it suddenly all went terribly wrong. Sshosk, the Lizardman pilot, was the last obstacle between the player characters and stealing that dropship. Well, that, and I was timing how long it would take the Gorum to start climbing out of the hole. Sshosk didn't have a lot of hit points. If Olan had managed to get up behind him and roll a 3 or better on his damage roll during a sneak attack, he would have taken the Lizardman out. But that's when Olan's luck ran completely out. He failed his move silently check while he was creeping up on Sshosk. Now, the ship was not so big that a player character couldn't reach him in a single round, and this is where the surprise rolls come in. In almost all old versions of Dungeons & Dragons, you roll a 6-sided die for each party during an encounter, unless there's a reason why one group would know the other group was coming. On a 1 or a 2, that group can't act during the first round, giving the other side effectively a free shot to sort things out, or run away. If both parties are surprised, there's a moment where they stare at each other dumbfounded, which is usually the best opportunity for player characters to defuse a potentially dangerous situation. The surprise die is the way that player characters who say they're sneaking and are not thieves resolve the mechanic. They have a 1 in 3 chance of not alerting creatures that they're coming. Now, a GM does have to be judicious with this. If the player characters are marching through a dungeon with no light, flashing lanterns around, if they fought just a room over, or what have you, then surprise is gone, at least for the monsters. It may still affect the player characters. It's one of the many ways in which a dungeon encounter in a traditional dark stone dungeon becomes incredibly perilous for player characters unless they're very clever and circumspect with how they move through the dungeon. In this case, the surprise die was telling me just how close did Olan get to Sshosk before he gets to draw. Even though he failed to move silently, there's a chance that Sshosk just isn't quick enough to roll off even initiative against Olan. Unfortunately, I rolled a 6 for Sshosk's surprise. And so initiative became an Old West quick draw test. Which one of them can pull a laser weapon faster and gun the other one down? It made sense that Miria and Rayya would not be able to act in that first round. They were letting Olan scout ahead. And again, here's where the dice failed Olan. I rolled a 2 on his initiative and a 5 for Sshosk's. Sshosk pulled a lightweight laser weapon, aimed, and fired, dealing a d10 of damage. Olan, with his 5 hit points, had a 50-50 chance of surviving. And again, the dice were not with me. I rolled a 7, more damage than he had hit points. Between the move silently roll, the surprise roll, and the initiative roll, I gave Olan every possible chance to do some damage to Sshosk. But sadly there was no saving him. At least he went down a hero. Without him, the rest of the party never would have made it out of there alive. After the protracted battle where she just couldn't beat Kalmek, Rayya might not have been able to get away from the Gorum in time, and Miria would have been helplessly manacled. And I would be restarting this series very, very quickly. As it is, I've decided that it's going to be the catalyst that drives Miria to try and help the people of Nar. to weed out the corruption that led someone to hire Mormont and put them in this terrible situation, and to give Yanghu a reason to keep coming back not just to sell Gorum, but obviously to do business with someone on the planet for something valuable. Obviously, I have my suspicions about who that is, but I'm going to let the dice tell me in due time. I actually waited quite some time before I told my son what had happened. He couldn't make heads or tails of the notes I was keeping, although he was desperate to know what the story was ahead of time. Once I told him that Olan was dead, he didn't speak to me for 2 days, and he has promised me that he will never listen to this episode of the podcast. Well, at least it gave me the opportunity to sneak a little romance in. My boy is of the age where he still gags every time there's a kiss on a screen during an action movie. He'll forgive me eventually, I hope. And now I have the drive and the opportunity to introduce some new player characters, with the promise of a future of space travel, and the ability to punish the Tracy Syndicate for manipulating them so badly. I expect that there'll be at least a few adventurous youths in Nar interested in signing up to Miria's cause. Now, I'm not at all interested in giving people any plot armor. I don't think this podcast would be very worth listening to if I did. But I did find myself with a question. Just how good is the medical technology from where Miria is from? Could they, in fact, repair brain damage if the body was pretty fresh? And so I asked the Mythic Game Master emulator 2 questions. The first was, does the interstellar civilization that Miria and Yanghu come from have the ability to repair that kind of catastrophic damage? And the answer was yes. And so I asked, could these medkits possibly save Olan's life, hoping that for once the chaos factor might work for me? The answer was an extreme no. This led to another question. Can these medkits actually help Miria? And I got another no. That's when I got the idea that maybe Yanghu expected Miria to steal his medkits, and that he definitely didn't want dungeon delvers seeking out his layers for the advanced medical technology in them, and so he made sure they were of no benefit to any of the humans that might find them. Yanghu's shaping up to be one nasty piece of work. I'm looking forward to taking him down. In the meantime, rest in peace, Olan. Hopefully you will be avenged. The dropship roared across the night sky, raking the canopy and leaving scorched leaves behind it. In the command chair, Miria tweaked settings, trying to get the ship to fly the way she wanted to. Frustrated, upset, but glad to finally be flying again, at the very least. In a few minutes they were nearly back to the village, when the first pillar of light arched down from the sky, incinerating trees only meters away from their hull.
Frel!
Miria pitched hard to port, steering away from the village and cutting north where the jungle was thicker. Another beam of cohesive light arced down from the sky, and then another, incinerating trees and boiling water.
What's going on? Yanghu's decided he'd rather destroy the ship than let us have it. What can we do? Behind your head and to the right, there's a panel. Rip it open. This one? I can't look to tell you. I've got to keep moving. Okay, I've got it ripped open. What now? Is there a little box shaped kind of like a hammer? Multiple glass panels on it? Blinking lights? Yes, connected by 2 cords. Perfect. Pull it out.
Rayya was thrown down the stairs as Miria was forced to swerve to avoid another beam of light. She staggered up it quickly.
What happens if one of those touches us? Remember how I arrived on this planet? Yeah? That, only there's no water to save us.
Rayya grabbed hold of the small box and pulled it from its mooring.
Okay, I've got the little box. Now what? Hold on tight!
The ship narrowly evaded another column of light. Rayya braced herself and narrowly evaded another fall down the stairs.
I'm opening the hatch. I want you to throw that out.
The wind roared as the hatch opened while the ship moved. For a moment, Rayya stood paralyzed, her stomach lurching. Inside the ship, it didn't feel like you were moving very much at all, but now she could see how fast the jungle was whipping behind her. Horrendous visions sailed through her head of what that would do to her if she fell out.
Throw it, quick!
Holding down her gorge, Rayya wound up and chucked it as hard as she could. Once the wind caught it, it seemed to sail away at breakneck speeds. And then behind them, another beam of light. Then they stopped.
Mind telling me what I just threw out of the back of the ship? The ship's main transponder. Basically, it's a device that tells other ships where we are. Firing a weapon from outside an atmosphere into it is very hard. Without that, he won't be able to shoot us unless he comes down here. That's good. That's very good. What's the downside of having thrown it out of the ship? Without one, space travel would have been suicide. Can we get another? I think so, but it depends. On what? On whether or not we can cure radiation poisoning on this planet. Because the only other transponder I know is on this planet is on the Imperial's coin.
Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Swords Against Madness. As always, it's been a wild ride, and I am grateful to you for coming and listening to it. There is a lot of companion material I generated over the course of this adventure. You can find it in the show notes at swordsvmadness.stormheadproductions.ca, where I keep monster stats, magic items, and other content I create for the game, along with maps, character sheets, and even samples of my role-playing games. I also love hearing from my audience. You can reach me on Twitter at swordsvmadness. The music in this podcast is generated by me, Brian C. Rideout, using Suno AI, and is available for download either on swordsvmadness.stormheadproductions.ca or on Suno, where you can find me under the username Donut Elemental. If you're interested in supporting the show, you can make a small one-time donation using PayPal on my homepage. Or if you're like me and you'd like to buy something, I have a number of products on DriveThruRPG and itch.io through my imprint Death Trap Games. You can learn more about that on my blog, Welcome to the Death Trap, which you can find at deathtrapgames.blogspot.com. And if you just want to shoot the breeze about podcast production, it's one of my favorite topics, and you can reach me at brian@stormheadproductions.ca. Until next time, play hard, roll high, and think weird.